The wind swept across the arid mesa like a restless spirit, carrying dust, the smell of sagebrush, and the faint echoes of a past long forgotten. At the edge of the rocky bluff, Kaelen Stormhawk, a solitary Apache warrior, sat atop his horse, high scanning the horizon. The world below him, a scattering of wooden cabins, grazing horses, and the curling trails of smoke from distant chimneys, was quiet, almost eerily so. Kaelen had lived on the fringes of these lands for years, choosing solitude over the complications of settlements, friendships, or attachments. His people had long since scattered, and the only footprints he followed were his own. Kaelen's dark eyes, sharp and alert, caught a glimpse of movement in the valley below. A horse trudged wearily along the narrow path, carrying a woman and a young boy. The horse's flanks were sweaty, its hooves kicking up clouds of dust. Something in their posture tired, worn, almost broken made Kaelen's instincts flare. He had been alone for so long that the sight of other human life stirred something he hadn't felt in years: curiosity, and perhaps a strange flicker of empathy. The woman was of average height, her figure wrapped tightly in a faded cloak. Her dark hair was streaked with dust, her face etched with lines of fatigue and quiet resilience. She carried herself with the careful grace of someone who had learned to survive without reliance on anyone else. And yet, beneath that guarded exterior, Kaelen could sense vulnerability, a story of loss that mirrored, in some ways, his own. The boy clung to her side, small and alert, his eyes scanning their surroundings with a mixture of fear and trust. Kaelen swung his horse down the bluff with silent precision, landing several yards from the pair. The sudden appearance startled them. The woman stiffened, tightening her grip on the boy, while Kaelen raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," he said, his voice deep calm, carrying the weight of someone who had spoken few words over many years. The woman's dark eyes narrowed, assessing him carefully. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but wary. "Why are you here?" "I am Kaelen Stormhawk," he replied. "I live in these hills." "You look tired. Hungry, perhaps. Do you need help?" The woman's expression softened for the first time, though only slightly. She hesitated, weighing the risks. Traveling alone or with a child through the wilds of Apache territory was dangerous. Trusting a stranger, even one who appeared human and composed, could be deadly. But desperation is a persuasive force, and her horse had barely managed another step before it collapsed under exhaustion. I am Eleanor Hayes," she said finally, her voice quiet, almost resigned. "This is my son, Thomas. We've been traveling since the fire took our home." Her hand briefly brushed the boy's shoulder, a protective gesture, before she added, "We have nowhere left to go." Kaelen studied them in silence. He had seen the aftermath of fire, of towns lost to greed, violence, or careless hands. He had felt the sting of loneliness that came from losing one's own tribe, one's own family. And yet, he had never taken in strangers not willingly. But something about Eleanor and her boy stirred a long-dormant sense of responsibility. Something that whispered that perhaps he was not destined to remain alone. "You may ride with me," he said at last, gesturing to his horse. "I have a shelter in the canyon below. It is safe for now." Eleanor's eyes widened, torn between caution and relief. She glanced at her son, who nodded slightly, trusting her judgment. "We would be grateful," she said, as they followed Kaelen down the winding trail. The desert seemed to hush around them. Kaelen kept his gaze forward, but his thoughts wandered. He did not yet know that this chance encounter would alter the course of his life, that the woman and her boy, weary and scarred by misfortune, would come to occupy the space in his heart that he had long thought empty. For now, though Kaelen rode in silence, his horse's hooves echoing against the rocky path. He didn't speak of the past, and Eleanor didn't ask. Between them lay an unspoken truce. Two survivors, bound together by circumstance, stepping into the unknown. And in the heart of the vast, unforgiving wilderness, a fragile connection began to form, one that would grow stronger with every trial yet to come. The sun dipped low, painting the mesa in gold and crimson. Shadows lengthened across the canyon as Kaelen led Eleanor and her son toward his hidden home. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the first stirrings of something dangerous, something he had not allowed himself to feel in years, the possibility of family. The canyon was hidden from sight, tucked between jagged cliffs that rose like sentinels from the desert floor. Kaelen led Eleanor and Thomas along a narrow path, the horses' hooves clattering against stone. The air was cooler here, the scent of pine and earth replacing the dust and smoke of the open mesa. Kaelen moved with the fluid grace of someone born to the land, every step certain, every motion precise. Eleanor followed closely, holding Thomas's hand, the boy's small fingers curling around hers in quiet trust. "You've lived out here long?" Eleanor asked, her voice careful, as if speaking too loudly might shatter this fragile safety. Kaelen shook his head slightly, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. "Years. Long enough to know these canyons better than I know the towns." His tone was neutral, but there was a hint of something unspoken grief. Perhaps, or memories he refused to share. Eleanor nodded, taking in the rugged cliffs, the hidden caves, and the sparse brush that clung stubbornly to life. There was beauty here, harsh and untamed, yet she sensed the isolation Kaelen must have endured. She had known loneliness herself, though of a different kind, the kind born from fire, loss, and the collapse of a life you once called home. They arrived at a narrow alcove where Kaelen had cleared a small area for living. A rough stone fire pit sat in the center, surrounded by makeshift benches of carved logs. A cave at the back of the alcove offered shelter from wind and rain, its interior lined with furs and blankets. Kaelen dismounted, gesturing toward the space. "This will keep you safe. Water is nearby, and game is close for food." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. "You've lived like this alone? For all these years?" Kaelen's jaw tightened slightly. "Alone. It has its advantages." He paused, studying her carefully. "It has its disadvantages as well." Thomas, small and quiet, explored the perimeter, his gaze wide with curiosity. He seemed more at home here than Eleanor, his small figure moving with instinctive ease over rocks and underbrush. Kaelen watched him with an unreadable expression. He hadn't realized how much life could shift in the presence of another soul, even a child's. Eleanor knelt beside the fire pit and began arranging the blankets, her hands moving with the familiarity of someone used to survival. "I can cook. I can help." Her voice was tentative, almost testing the boundaries of this stranger's solitude. Kaelen simply nodded. He didn't ask for help, didn't encourage it, but he also didn't refuse. There was a subtle tension between them, an unspoken question of trust. Eleanor was wary of becoming too dependent, yet relieved to find someone willing to offer refuge without expecting anything in return. As night fell, the canyon darkened quickly. Stars spilled across the sky like scattered embers. Kaelen started a small fire, and its warm glow painted his face in sharp contrasts, muscles taut, eyes reflecting the flames, his long black hair catching streaks of moonlight. Eleanor and Thomas sat on the far side, watching him move with the quiet confidence of a predator who had learned to survive in solitude. "You hunt alone?" Eleanor asked cautiously, her voice barely above the crackling of the fire. "Sometimes," Kaelen replied. "Sometimes with the wind and the land as my company. It teaches you patience." He paused, glancing at Thomas. "And caution." Thomas nodded, understanding more than Eleanor realized. There was something about Kaelen that spoke in a language of experience. of endurance, of unspoken connection to the world around him. The fire crackled, and silence fell, punctuated only by the distant hoot of an owl. Eleanor felt a strange mix of comfort and unease. She wanted to speak, to learn more about this man who had taken them in, yet she feared overstepping. Kaelen, for his part, was aware of the weight of their presence in his life. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but he sensed that his world, the world of isolation and careful detachment, was shifting. Slowly, imperceptibly, they were leaving a marked dot as sleep approached. Eleanor wrapped a blanket around Thomas, who had finally settled near the fire. Kaelen remained outside, keeping watch over the canyon. His eyes scanned the shadows, alert to every rustle, every flicker of movement. And yet, beneath that vigilance, there was a warmth that he had not felt in years, a quiet acceptance that perhaps this chance encounter was not just fate, but the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. For the first time in a long while, Kaelen allowed himself to imagine a future where he was not entirely alone, where the hollow echo of his canyon walls could be filled with laughter, voices, and the presence of a family that he had never expected to find. The desert night deepened, and the canyon held them in a silent embrace. A lonely Apache warrior had offered shelter to a widow and her son, unaware that by morning the first threads of family would begin to weave themselves into the fabric of his life. Morning broke over the canyon with a silver haze, sunlight spilling across the rugged cliffs and illuminating the narrow path that led to Kaelen's hidden shelter. Eleanor stirred first, brushing her dark hair from her face as she wrapped Thomas in a spare blanket. The boy yawned, stretching with a quiet eagerness that made Eleanor smile despite the lingering exhaustion of their journey. Kaelen was already awake, standing at the edge of the alcove, surveying the canyon below with sharp, calculating eyes. His long black hair fell over his broad shoulders, and his bare chest gleamed in the morning sun, the tribal jewelry he wore catching glimmers of light. Even in the soft dawn, there was an intensity to him that Eleanor found both intimidating and strangely reassuring. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew the land better than anyone, every rock, every shadow, every hidden path. "You should eat," Kaelen said finally, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. He gestured toward the small fire pit where he had stored a few dried meat strips and berries. Eleanor nodded, and together they ate in silence, the boy clutching a piece of jerky as though it were treasure. After breakfast, Kaelen led them out along a narrow trail toward a small spring he had discovered months ago. Water ran clear and cool, bubbling over smooth stones. Thomas knelt eagerly, cupping water in his hands, while Eleanor bent to fill a leather pouch. Kaelen watched them with a quiet intensity, the corners of his mouth tight. Something about watching them move freely in the canyon stirred a protective instinct he hadn't anticipated as they were finishing. A sudden rustle from the canyon's rim made Kaelen freeze. His hand went instinctively to the bough slung across his back. Eleanor stiffened, and Thomas shrank close to her side. "What is it?" Eleanor whispered. Kaelen's eyes narrowed. "Hunters. Or worse, bandits." He scanned the cliffs, tracking movement among the rocks. Two figures appeared, advancing cautiously, weapons at the ready. They were strangers, but the way they moved spoke of experience and intent. Kaelen stepped between them and the spring, his stance low and deliberate. Eleanor clutched Thomas and took a step back. "Kaelen, what should we do?" Kaelen didn't answer at first. His mind ran through possibilities, calculating distances, escape routes, and potential outcomes. Then he spoke, voice steady but commanding. "Do not make a sound. Stay behind me." The strangers drew closer. Kaelen let the first one see him fully, a muscular, shirtless Apache with long black hair, tribal jewelry glinting in the sun, and eyes that held centuries of survival. The intruders faltered slightly, as if realizing they had underestimated the man before them. Kaelen's presence radiated a dangerous calm, the kind that makes men hesitate before striking. "You've wandered into Apache territory," Kaelen said, voice low and dangerous. "Leave now, and I will not follow." One of the men sneered, stepping forward, weapon raised. Kaelen's eyes darkened. With a speed that seemed almost supernatural, he grabbed a long hunting knife from his belt, spinning it expertly. The intruder's sneer froze as Kaelen closed the distance in a heartbeat. The other man dropped his bow slightly, hesitating, and Kaelen used the pause to advance, forcing them back toward the edge of the trail. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as she watched him move efficient, precise, deadly. She had seen men fight before, but never like this. There was a strange beauty in his movements, a deadly poetry that left her simultaneously terrified and captivated. Finally, Kaelen stepped back, his knife still poised. The men, now pale and wary, gave a nod of surrender before retreating slowly. Kaelen did not follow. Instead, he turned back to Eleanor and Thomas, his expression softening only slightly. "Are you both unharmed?" he asked. "Yes," Eleanor said, relief washing through her. "Thanks to you." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just a warrior, but a protector. Someone who, despite his solitude, had chosen to stand for them. Thomas, eyes wide, whispered, "Kaelen, you're amazing." Kaelen's jaw tightened, and he gave a small nod, but he did not smile. His attention had already shifted back to the canyon, alert to any further threat. Yet beneath the vigilance, there was a faint warmth, a sense that perhaps, for the first time in years, he was no longer truly alone. That night, as Eleanor and Thomas slept near the fire, Kaelen sat outside, bow across his knees. Stars stretched endlessly above the canyon, and the wind whispered through the cliffs. He allowed himself a single thought, quiet and almost forbidden. Perhaps this widow and her boy were not just fleeting companions. Perhaps they were the family he had never expected to find. The tether to a life he had long believed was lost to him. The desert held its breath, and Kaelen Stormhawk, the solitary Apache, realized that survival was no longer just about him, it was about them too. And somehow, that realization made the canyon feel a little less empty and his heart a little less guarded. The morning sun filtered through the narrow canyon, casting long, jagged shadows across the rocky floor. Kaelen Stormhawk moved silently along the ridge above the alcove, scanning the horizon for any sign of the bandits from yesterday. Eleanor had woken early and was tending to the small garden of wild herbs she had found near the spring, while Thomas collected firewood with the enthusiasm of a boy who had discovered freedom. Despite the relative calm, a tension hung over the canyon. Kaelen could feel it in the wind, in the whisper of leaves and the distant caw of a raven circling above. Something was coming, something he could not yet name. The solitude he had clung to for so long was being challenged in ways he hadn't anticipated. And the presence of Eleanor and Thomas complicated everything. Kaelen returned to the alcove, muscles rippling as he dismounted from his horse. Still shirtless, tribal jewelry glinting in the sunlight. Eleanor looked up from arranging dried herbs and offered a small smile. "Good morning," she said softly, trying to bridge the space that still separated their worlds. "Morning," Kaelen replied, his voice even, though his eyes lingered on her briefly, unreadable. Thomas ran ahead to the spring, his laughter echoing against the cliffs. Kaelen allowed himself a faint smile. The boy's joy was a rare balm, a reminder that life could still hold light even in the harshest wilderness. After breakfast, Eleanor approached Kaelen cautiously. "Kaelen, may I ask you something?" He nodded. "Speak. Why did you help us?" "You could have left us to struggle or worse." Her dark eyes searched his face for an answer. Kaelen's jaw tightened. I've walked alone for years. I thought I was content in solitude. But there are times when fate, or chance, places people in your path. You and Thomas. You were in danger. I could not leave you. He paused as if weighing how much to reveal. I did not expect to care. Eleanor's eyes softened, sensing the quiet vulnerability behind his stoic expression. I understand, she said gently. I suppose. We never choose when someone becomes family. Sometimes it just happens. Before Kaelen could respond, a rustle came from the cliffs above. Thomas froze mid-step, and Eleanor grabbed his arm. Kaelen's eyes snapped to the sound, bow in hand. A figure emerged, a young woman, rugged and dusty, clearly traveling alone. Her eyes widened when she saw Kaelen. Wait, she called, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. Please, I mean no harm. Kaelen held his position, muscles tense, eyes scanning for danger. Who are you? He demanded, voice low and commanding. My name is Leora, the woman said, breathing hard from her climb. I was traveling with my brother when they attacked us. I ran, and I saw smoke. I thought maybe someone could help. Eleanor stepped closer to Kaelen, placing a protective hand on his arm. Kaelen, perhaps she can be trusted. She's alone. She needs shelter, just as we did. Kaelen studied Leora. There was honesty in her eyes, and yet a shadow of fear lingered. He did not lower his guard entirely. You will stay where I can see you. Do not move until I say so. Leora nodded, trembling slightly. Eleanor guided her to the alcove, offering water and a blanket. Thomas, ever curious, tried to make her smile with a clumsy joke. For a moment, the tension in the canyon softened, replaced by quiet camaraderie. Later, as night fell, Kaelen sat apart from the fire, sharpening arrows with meticulous care. Eleanor watched him, sensing the battle within him, between the instincts of a lone warrior and the pull of unexpected family. You keep secrets, Eleanor said softly. Breaking the silence, Kaelen glanced at her. Everyone has secrets. Mine are many, but some you will never understand. Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflective. I don't need to understand everything, Kaelen. I need to trust you. And I do. The wind whispered through the canyon as stars blinked above. Kaelen's gaze drifted to Thomas, asleep against Eleanor, and to Leora, resting uneasily in a corner. For the first time, the weight of responsibility pressed fully on him. Protecting these people was more than survival. It was about trust, care, and perhaps even something he had never allowed himself to consider, belonging. He tightened his grip on the bow and let out a slow breath. The canyon was no longer just his home, it was theirs. And as shadows shifted among the cliffs, Kaelen Stormhawk knew the path ahead would test every skill he had and challenge every rule he had lived by. But one thing was certain, he would not fail. Not for Eleanor, not for Thomas, not for the fragile beginnings of family he had never expected to find. The sun dipped low over the canyon, painting the jagged cliffs with a fiery glow. Kaelen Stormhawk stood at the edge of the alcove, bow in hand, muscles tense, eyes scanning the horizon. Eleanor and Thomas moved quietly behind him, carrying water and a small bundle of herbs Eleanor had gathered. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that made Kaelen pause. Smoke, not distant too close. Too deliberate. He knelt briefly, narrowing his eyes, listening to the faint crackle of movement through the dry brush. Bandits, he muttered under his breath. They've returned. Eleanor froze, clutching Thomas's hand. What do we do? Kaelen's gaze swept the canyon. We defend. We do not run. His tone brooked no argument. He had taught himself long ago that survival in these hills demanded courage, skill, and a calm mind. But this time, it was not just his life at stake, it was theirs. The first figures appeared at the ridge above, shadowed against the setting sun. 3 men, armed and determined, moved with practiced stealth. Kaelen signaled Eleanor to move Thomas behind the rock formations near the fire pit. She obeyed silently, feeling the weight of fear and trust in equal measure. Kaelen drew an arrow from his quiver, the string of his bow humming as he took aim. His muscles flexed under the dying light, tribal jewelry catching the sun in sharp glints. The bandits froze for a heartbeat, sensing the danger in the lone warrior standing before them. "You do not belong here," Kaelen said, voice low but powerful, carrying over the dry canyon wind. "Leave now, and I will not follow." One of the men laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "We've got nothing to lose, Apache. Step aside or die." Kaelen's eyes narrowed, and in the next instant he moved with the speed and precision of a striking hawk. The first arrow flew, cutting a line through the air and embedding itself in the ground at the feet of the leader. Startled, the men scattered slightly, but one advanced, knife gleaming in the last light of day. Kaelen met him head-on, parrying the blade with his forearm and countering with a swift strike that forced the intruder back. Eleanor clutched Thomas, her heart pounding. She had never seen a man fight like Kaelen. Every movement was a perfect combination of strength, strategy, and instinct. The air seemed to pulse with energy, charged with the life-and-death struggle playing out in the canyon. One of the bandits tried to flank Kaelen from behind. The warrior pivoted, his body coiled and ready, and with a single fluid motion, he disarmed the man, sending the weapon skittering across the rocks. He didn't speak, didn't gloat. There was no malice, only the calm certainty of someone defending what mattered most. Finally, the remaining bandits, seeing their companions fall and the fierceness of Kaelen's skill, hesitated. Kaelen loosed a second arrow, embedding it between 2 rocks near their feet, a clear warning. They retreated slowly, fear overtaking greed. Kaelen kept his eyes on them until they vanished behind the cliffs, then turned, breathing deeply but controlled, his chest rising and falling with measured calm. Eleanor exhaled, wrapping Thomas in a trembling embrace. "Kaelen, you saved us," she whispered. Kaelen's eyes softened slightly, though his body remained taut. "It is not over. They may return. We must be ready." That night, as the fire crackled and the stars glimmered above, Eleanor prepared a small meal while Thomas sat close, wide-eyed and still full of adrenaline. Kaelen remained on the perimeter, watching the cliffs, alert to every sound. Yet beneath the vigilance, there was a rare vulnerability, a sense of responsibility and attachment he had not felt in years. Eleanor approached him quietly, offering a plate. "Eat," she said softly. "Even warriors need rest." Kaelen took the plate, nodding in silent acknowledgement, and sat near the fire. For the first time since their arrival, he allowed himself to feel something beyond the fight for survival. The canyon, once a place of isolation, was transforming into a home. A place of beginnings. A place where family, unexpected, unplanned, but deeply needed, was taking root. Thomas looked up at him, eyes bright and trusting. "Kaelen, do you think they'll come back?" Kaelen's jaw tightened, and he looked out into the canyon, shadows stretching long and dark. "Perhaps. But we will face them. Together." Eleanor felt a swell of gratitude and something deeper, unspoken. Kaelen Stormhawk, the solitary Apache who had once walked the desert alone, was slowly becoming the center of their world. And in that quiet, tension-filled night, the bonds of trust, respect, and family grew stronger. Like roots finding water in dry soil. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the promise of trials yet to come. But for the first time, Kaelen allowed himself a measure of hope. They were no longer just strangers in his canyon, they were his responsibility, his family, and perhaps, in some way, the beginning of something that had long seemed impossible. Night descended on the canyon like a velvet curtain. Stars scattered across the sky in quiet brilliance. Kaelen Stormhawk sat atop a flat rock near the fire, muscles relaxed but senses alert. His long black hair fell over his shoulders, tribal jewelry catching glints of firelight. Eleanor and Thomas had finally settled into the alcove, wrapped in blankets, though the tension from the day's attack lingered in the air like smoke. "You think they'll come back?" Thomas whispered, his small frame shivering despite the warmth of the fire. Kellen's gaze swept the cliffs above, dark shapes shifting with the wind. "Perhaps. But they will find more than they expect if they do." His voice was low and steady, carrying both warning and reassurance. Eleanor approached cautiously, carrying a small bowl of stew. "You should eat something, Kaelen. You fought all day. Even warriors need rest." Kaelen accepted the bowl with a slight nod, his fingers brushing hers briefly. There was an intimacy in the gesture, a fleeting connection that Eleanor felt deep in her chest. She had seen men fight, men survive, but this closeness and quiet intensity was unlike anything she had known. As they ate, the canyon seemed to hold its breath. Then a rustle from the cliff startled them. Kellen's head snapped toward the sound, eyes narrowing. "Stay behind me," he ordered, standing and drawing his bow. Thomas shrank close to Eleanor, who placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with a grim expression, carrying supplies and weapons. Kaelen lowered his bow slightly but did not relax. "Who are you?" he demanded. The man stepped into the firelight. "Name's Rourke," he said, voice harsh. "I've been tracking those bandits. I know where they came from." His gaze flicked to Eleanor and Thomas. "You're hiding them. Dangerous." Eleanor tensed. "We don't want trouble," she said firmly. "We're just trying to survive." Kaelen studied Rourke carefully, every muscle coiled, every instinct sharpened. He did not like strangers near his sanctuary, and the tension in the man's posture spoke of ulterior motives. "Why are you really here?" Kaelen asked, voice low but cutting. Rourke's eyes glinted. "Let's just say I have an interest in who survives in these hills. I could help or I could take everything." A silence fell. The canyon seemed to contract, the wind whispering through rocks like a warning. Kaelen knew this was a test, a measure of trust and a threat. He had fought to protect Eleanor and Thomas all day, and now a new danger loomed, one far more subtle and unpredictable. "You will not harm them," Kaelen said firmly, each word carrying weight. "If you step 1 foot closer without my leave, you will regret it." Rourke smirked, a dangerous curl of the lip. "We'll see, Apache." He turned, retreating into the darkness, but his warning lingered like a shadow. Kaelen did not follow. He returned to the fire, every sense heightened, knowing that the night was far from safe. Eleanor knelt beside him, placing her hand on his arm. "Kaelen, do you trust anyone else?" she asked softly. Kellen's eyes softened slightly, reflecting the flickering flames. "Trust is earned, Eleanor, and few have earned mine. You are beginning to." Thomas yawned, settling closer to his mother. "I feel safe with you," he said quietly, looking up at Kaelen with unguarded trust. Kaelen allowed himself a faint smile. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it held a depth of feeling he had not allowed himself to express in years. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows on the cliff walls. In that moment, the canyon, once a refuge of solitude, was no longer just his. It was theirs. His responsibility, his burden, and his anchor. As the night deepened, Kaelen climbed to a higher ledge to keep watch, eyes scanning the darkened cliffs and distant trails. The wind whispered secrets through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and distant smoke. Danger was not over. The bandits, Rourke, or something yet unknown could return at any moment. Yet beneath the tension, a stronger force stirred within Kaelen, something he had never allowed himself to feel: belonging. Eleanor and Thomas were no longer just travelers he protected out of duty. They were threads woven into the fabric of his life, fragile but resilient. And he would not allow anything to tear them from him. The desert night stretched endlessly above, stars glittering like scattered diamonds. Kaelen Stormhawk, the solitary Apache warrior, sat alone but not lonely, every muscle poised, every sense alert, guarding not just his life, but the lives of the family he had never expected to claim. And for the first time, he allowed himself to hope that, perhaps, they were his permanently. The first light of dawn crept into the canyon, casting a soft golden glow across the cliffs and alcove. The night had been long, filled with tension and uneasy sleep, but for the first time in many days, Kaelen Stormhawk felt a fragile sense of calm. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the scents of sage, pine, and earth, the smells of home. Eleanor stirred first, gently nudging Thomas awake. "Come on, sleepyhead," she said, her voice light but tender. The boy yawned, rubbing his eyes, then smiled as he saw Kaelen standing nearby, bow slung across his broad shoulders, muscles taut even in repose. He looked every bit the fierce protector she had come to trust. Yet there was something softer now in his eyes, something that had not been there when they first met. Kaelen watched them quietly, chest rising and falling with measured calm. The events of the past days weighed on him, the attacks, the threats, the intrusions, but beneath it all, a new reality had settled in. This was no longer just a temporary refuge. Eleanor and Thomas had become part of his life, and he of theirs. "Kaelen," Eleanor began, hesitating as she approached him, We want to stay. Here, with you? You've saved us, protected us, and I think we found something we didn't expect." Her dark eyes searched his, vulnerable yet resolute. Kaelen's jaw tightened. For years he had lived in solitude, trusting only himself, allowing no one to penetrate the walls he had built around his life. But those walls had begun to crumble, piece by piece, over meals shared, fires lit together, and the quiet moments of watchfulness and care. He nodded slowly. "If you stay, it will not be easy. Danger may come again. Life here, it is harsh. And yet, if you truly wish it, you are welcome." Thomas beamed, tugging at Eleanor's hand. "I want to stay. I want to live here with Kaelen." His voice was filled with unguarded joy, the kind that made Kaelen's chest tighten in a way he had not expected. The day began with preparation. Kaelen led them to a hidden spring to fetch fresh water, teaching Thomas to move quietly, observe carefully, and respect the land. Eleanor gathered herbs and prepared a simple meal. Laughter mingling with the wind, a sound Kaelen had thought lost to him forever. As midday approached, the quiet was broken by distant voices, men approaching, armed and hostile. Kaelen's eyes narrowed, muscles coiling with readiness. But this time he was not alone. Eleanor and Thomas stood beside him, calm and determined, their presence a reminder that they were now a unit. The bandits arrived, confident in numbers and weapons, but the sight of Kaelen standing resolute, flanked by Eleanor and Thomas, gave them pause. The warrior's gaze was unwavering, bow raised, body a perfect balance of tension and precision. Eleanor, standing firm, met their eyes without fear, and Thomas held a staff, small but determined. The bandits faltered. Kaelen's voice rang out, steady and commanding, "Leave now. You will not harm my family." For a long moment, the canyon was silent. Then, one by one, the bandits retreated, realizing that no single threat was as formidable as the unity before them. Kaelen watched them go, chest still taut with adrenaline, yet a faint smile tugged at his lips. Later, as the sun dipped into late afternoon, Kaelen, Eleanor, and Thomas returned to the alcove. The canyon seemed warmer now, more alive, filled with a sense of permanence. They sat together near the fire, the warrior finally allowing himself to relax. Eleanor reached for his hand, and Kaelen did not pull away. He felt a sense of belonging he had never imagined possible. "Kaelen," she said softly, "this place, this family, it's yours now as much as ours." He looked at Thomas, whose eyes gleamed with trust and admiration, and then at Eleanor, whose presence had quietly transformed the emptiness of his life into something rich and enduring. "It is ours," Kaelen said, voice low but filled with certainty. "We survived together. We lived together. And we will face whatever comes together." As night fell, the canyon held them in its embrace, shadows soft against the cliffs. For the first time in years, Kaelen Stormhawk allowed himself to believe that solitude was no longer his destiny. He had found something far more valuable: family, trust, and a future worth protecting. The fire crackled gently, Thomas asleep on Eleanor's lap, Eleanor resting against Kaelen's side. The desert night stretched endlessly above, but the warrior felt anchored, not alone. And in that quiet, profound moment, Kaelen understood that some encounters, some choices, could change the course of a lifetime. He had taken in a widow and her son, unaware they would become his family forever. Now nothing could tear them apart.